put myself on mute until you've done your introduction.
Sounds good. These lovely people waiting any longer. So hello everybody and good morning. Thank you for joining me. I'm Heather Gray from Bruntwood Works and I hope you're all doing really well today and your week has started off well. As Kelly and I were just saying, spring is in the air, and after what feels like the longest, coldest winter ever, doesn't it make you feel more hopeful? In business development, I've always felt that almost subconsciously you find yourself doing different activities dependent on the season. So I'm not talking about, awards and Christmas party season as much as I can't wait to get back to a black tie event. No, it tends to mean that autumn and winter, we tend to spend more time than usual nurturing existing relationships. We spend more time on our referral pipeline and kind of looking after our existing customers and our existing partners. But spring and summer really kind of naturally lends itself to sowing those seeds for new business. So in normal times, we might be coming up to a peak of business networking events. And I think in general, that feeling of optimism that comes with the warm weather, it makes you think of new horizons, new opportunities. Now, some of you might have hit a point where you feel like you're now fishing from an empty pond. And I think through the pandemic, it's been a lot trickier than usual, to fill your sales pipeline, to build those new relationships. We've not been able to go to events. We've not been able to kind of, do those usual face-to-face meetings that spark new opportunities. But if you're looking at, how do I expand my business internationally? Or if you already do that and just think, I want to make this as effective as possible. I've only got so much time in the day. I might as well, turn those efforts into solid results. Then this is the webinar for you. So before we get started, I just wanted to kind of cover a little bit about Bruntwood Works, the Spark programme, and why we're doing this. So I'm Heather Gray, I'm the Business Development Manager over at Bruntwood Works, and we're a property developer and we create incredible office, retail and leisure space all across the north. Now, for us, it's not just about building incredible business buildings, it's about filling them with incredible businesses as well, and trying to create really strong communities where we can all work together and we can all thrive. Now, about 9 months ago, we started our business support programme, which is called Spark. And we've been covering workshops, webinars, advisory sessions, peer groups, all sorts, every way that you can absorb virtual content. And we've been working with experts like Kelly to cover every business topic that you could possibly imagine. So we've got personal development, right through to operations, right through to strategy. So after this, make sure you go and have a look at bruntwood.co.uk/spark and see what else we've got coming up. We've also got a really exciting announcement that we are working on for next month. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end as well. Now, I'm really thrilled to welcome the wonderful Kelly from Onno Training to lead today's session. So Kelly is a specialist helping businesses work more effectively internationally. I was reading her LinkedIn bio before, just to have a little recap ahead of this, and I was really astounded to see the range of customers that she's helped to, really maximise their global impact. It's literally everybody from, the armed forces right through to education specialists. You've got digital creative teams right through to football teams. And she's done loads of work protecting their brand, protecting their reputation, and helping them kind of master all of those cultural nuances to make sure that international fans and customers are really receptive and really engaged. So we will be saving a little bit of time at the end for a brief Q&A. Please do make sure you pop any questions into the chat box at the bottom as they come, into your head, because it's one of those, if you think I'll ask at the end, you usually forget. So pop them in as we go and Kelly will come to them at the end. So Kel, over to you.
Thank you. I feel kind of a little bit overwhelmed now with such a lovely introduction. Made for Tuesday morning, Heather. Yeah, please, like Heather was just saying, if you do have any questions at any point, pop them into the chat box, because we think of things and then you forget them by the end. So add those in. I'm just going to start sharing this with you now. So it should, anybody shout out if you can't see the screen. It should be working. I'm hoping you can all see that. Yeah, so as Heather was saying, I am Manchester based, but I've worked with people all over the globe in lots of different sectors, lots of different environments. And it's a really, really nice opportunity today to be working with people who are based as well in a similar area to myself, and think about how they're also going to start expanding, working globally, working with international clients. And if I can help you on that journey, then my work will be done, which is fantastic for today. Okay, so what we're going to look at is today thinking about when you're starting to work with new prospects or leads internationally, certain areas or factors that you need to take into consideration to make sure you're building up those relationships properly. Now, we all know that a really, really essential part of starting to effectively sell to people is that those 3 questions or those 3 points that are always reminded of, so that idea of knowing somebody, liking them and trusting them. And what I'm going to go through with you today are just a few little things that will help you really build up that know, like and trust factor so that you can sell effectively internationally. We're going to do that by looking at 3 main areas, or 3 key points that I think we need to really focus on when we're starting to develop this international sales strategy. And also when we do start selling or working on projects, things that we can continue to use throughout that process. So we've got these 3 points: preparation, which we're going to look at in some more detail in a second, then managing those relationships, how you can really nurture them and maintain them and make sure that they develop correctly, and adaptation, so how you might need to adapt some of your content or the style of what you're using and saying to really make sure that it connects with those international prospects or leads that you have. Now, one of the first things, sorry to point out, there is on my website, there's a free checklist that you can download. So I'm going to send that in a link in the follow-up email that Heather sends out, just so you can have that to hand if you do want it. There's loads of different things that we need to consider. And obviously today, there isn't time to cover all of them, but that might just be useful for you to have to hand, saved on your computer for as and when. So I'll include that at the end in a link that I send out with Heather. Right, so what we are going to think about is talking internationally, talking about different generalizations or stereotypes or things that can help us prepare for working internationally. But we need to remember that there are, of course, differences. Now, looking at this picture, you'll all immediately think, oh, that's a barm cake or a bap or a cob or a whatever one of the million names there are for this kind of bread roll that we have. And I really like this as an example of reminding people of those differences. So yeah, we know that within the UK, there are certain things that are kind of nationally accepted. You know, we're a country that likes order. We like to queue, for example. But of course, there are lots of regional differences and lots of differences among people. At the end of the day, every individual is an individual. We're all different. And I think we just need to remember that when we're talking globally about some of these stereotypes or some of these groupings that we can use to help us prepare and understand, not to lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, yes, these are things that can help us, but people are individuals and things will change. So to also be a little bit prepared for that as well. Okay. Right. So first thing we're going to be looking at of those 3 that we pointed out is preparation. Now, going back to the idea of knowing that when we're trying to build up a really good connection with people to sell to them, we've got to know, like, and trust them. So with those 3 things in mind, I've selected these 3 areas that we're going to have a look at today. So in order to build up a really, really good relationship with people, we need to know 3 key factors. So the hierarchy within the organization that we're going to be working with or we're going to be trying to work with. Names and greetings. So how do we call people? What names do we use? What things do we need to say to people? Do we need titles or not? And then a little bit about that relationship building process. Okay. So let's start in no particular order, but let's start with hierarchy. Okay. So my beautiful diagram that I've thrown up there for you, don't look at it in too much detail because lots of HR people won't be happy that they're on the same level as admin. I've just put in a little bit of a company structure to kind of help us focus on what we're talking about here. So when I talk about hierarchy within an organization and at an international level, we need to be careful to think that there are 2 main groups that we can talk about. So when we're talking about these organizations, we can think of them as egalitarian structures, or hierarchical structures, really quite strict hierarchical structures. And this is going to be really important for us when we're trying to start to build a relationship with people. And I'll tell you why in a moment. Let's first think about what these two groups are. So we've got egalitarian structures. No, so these would be organizations where people are really more or less on the same level. So the CEO might consider himself in a similar position to somebody who's quite junior within the organization. And within these egalitarian structures, everybody's input is valid. People can work at a similar level, people can share their opinions, people can speak up. And this is really important to understand who might be making decisions and where and when. Now, examples of places that have this more egalitarian structure will be, for example, we might have Australia, Canada, a lot of the Nordic countries as well, so Denmark, and also the Netherlands. And in these organizations, most people within those groups can make decisions. They can share their opinions and they can speak up. Thinking about more stricter hierarchical organizational structures, things are ordered. No, we have to be very careful who we're talking to. Now, this is really important when we're starting to do business with somebody or talking with a prospect, because it can help us understand who within that organization can make decisions. It can help us understand as well whether or not that person will need to ask for approval from people higher up and whether they're going to defer to authority. No, it can really help us to think as well about whether or not people are reluctant to make decisions and understand why that might be. Now, examples of more stricter hierarchical organizations would be those within France, Poland, Russia is a very good example of this, and as well quite a lot of Asian countries. Now, again, as a kind of rule of thumb, things that can help us remember which group our organization or our target organization might fall into. These egalitarian organizations really come from quite often, like I said, Nordic areas, but people who had maybe a Viking or a Protestant background. And within that country and that culture, this egalitarian process has always been embedded. And of course, that will seep into how they're working within their organization. Countries that have had, for example, quite a big Catholic religion, well, a big impact about through the Catholic religion, through being very Catholic, people who've had the Roman Empire as well as part of their past have that, again, hierarchy or that structure built into who they are almost, because it's been part of them for so long. And that can give us a bit of an indication when we're thinking about which group our target lead or audience might fall into. What happens with the UK and as well the USA is that we're somewhere in the middle, so we're a little bit more flexible, which actually can be quite helpful for us because then we have a kind of almost a neutral starting point. We can look at both directions, egalitarian or hierarchical, from where we start in the middle. Now, one last thing to say about this as well is something that we need to be really, really careful with. If we're trying to do business or we're targeting somebody from a very hierarchical structure, we need to be careful who we try to talk with. Very often, we need to be careful to try to find somebody who would be at the same level as us. You don't want to jump in and talk to somebody who is at a higher rank than we are, because that can be very offensive. And equally, you don't want to talk to somebody who's quite further down that hierarchical structure than you, because again, it can be offensive. So you need to work out where you might fall on an equivalent level within that company structure to work out who you're targeting, know who you're trying to talk to, or who you're trying to establish that relationship with. Now, similarly to how this hierarchical structure is going to work is thinking about the names that we're going to use. We need to be aware of what we're going to call people. If we're trying to set up a relationship with them or talk to them or organize meetings with them or have calls with them, what are you going to call them? Are you just going to call up and say, hey, Bob, hey, Mike? Or are you going to call them by their surname? Are you going to include a title? Doctor? Are you going to call them professor? No. And again, it's really important that we get this right, because what you don't want to do when you're trying to talk to a prospect or engage with them is put your foot in it. You don't want to make this mistake right up front. So you need to really consider where these people are or where these organizations are within that hierarchical structure that I just mentioned. If it's an egalitarian structure, again, you can probably call them by their first names, but if it's quite hierarchical, you're more likely to need to use that surname and also a title. Okay, so for example, you might be dealing with a company in Denmark, you can call the CEO by his first name, but you're dealing with a company in Russia or China and you need to be saying Mr. and the surname or Mrs. and the surname. Equally, it can be very, very useful if you know if they have a title, professor, doctor, to use that in there. And even people will talk about, for example, the CEOs or the very heads of organizations in Russia, Mr. President. So it's really worth looking into this and thinking what kind of name you should use when you're talking to people. Now, using names, of course, is really, really important. And thinking again about how you're talking to people, there might be an order in which you need to talk to people. So once you know what name you're going to use and how you're going to talk to them, think about that order, who you're talking to first. If it's an organization with a very hierarchical structure, there was probably or most likely be an order in which you need to introduce yourself or say hello to people or greet people. Okay, this is always going to go from the highest or the most senior down to the lowest. So if you have a meeting, you need to be careful who you talk to first. Do your homework, work out who is who, work out which structure that company is using. Okay. Parts of this, of course, is really going to help make that link with them and connect with them. And if you're really trying to build a relationship with your prospect or your lead, this is really, really important stuff. Okay. Don't assume that it's going to work in the same way as it might work when you're dealing with organizations within the UK. You've really got to respect authority and you've really got to respect that structure within certain cultures. Okay, the next thing that we're going to have a look at is this relationship building process almost. Now, when we start to talk to different people, we work out or we can see that there are different areas of the globe that will need more time to really start building trust. Now, I've put this on a line, as you can see on the screen, because it really isn't some people are here and other people are here. It's all part of a spectrum and they range in different varieties as to how much time you'll need to build that relationship with people. Now, some people who work, we call this working with your head or your heart. Organizations or cultures that work with their head, so to speak, are able to meet you, do the business dealings and go home. Organizations or cultures which work more with the heart really need a long time to build up a stronger relationship, to get to know you, to get to know who you are, who they're working with, in order to trust you before they can do business with you. And knowing which end of the spectrum, knowing which end of the spectrum your lead or your prospect is can really help you. Because if you're trying to start to get to know somebody or work with somebody from, we put, for example, as you can see on the screen, number 8, China. If you talk to them about prices and dealings on the first day and show them this fantastic offer that you have, you've probably lost them as a prospect because they need to know who they're working with, who they're dealing with, and they need time to build up this relationship. Okay. So I've put on the screen just a few different examples of countries, and what I'd like you to kind of take away is looking on that left-hand side, USA, Germany, UK, those cultures will need less time to build a relationship, so you can start showing them information, you can tell them what it is you're trying to do, you can talk about the offers that you might have or the products that you're trying to sell quite early on in that relationship. Whereas those which are further over on the right-hand side, so Japan, Brazil, China, are going to need a much bigger lead time. You're going to need to spend a lot more time and be in contact with them a lot more to really build up that relationship before they're going to be willing to buy anything from you. Okay, so it's taking that into consideration and thinking about the types of conversations that you might have when you're trying to build up that relationship with them. Think about the importance of really getting to know somebody. They want to know who you are, what you do. Personal conversations might be more important than they would be if you were dealing with people within the United States, for example. Okay. So all of that process really needs to be taken into consideration while you're preparing to really try and engage with these leads or these prospects. Think about the time it's going to take you. Think about that structure within the organization. Who are you targeting? Who will you be able to talk to? What might you need to call them? Are there any particular titles that you need to look up or check? So all of that is a really big part of that preparation. Okay. Now, there's a few things here I've just put as a list, things that you can remember or write down. Think about these things. They're not the only things, but think about these things in that time that you're using to prepare to engage with these leads or prospects. So if you're trying to greet somebody within the organization, who do you greet first? If you're in a meeting, who do you greet first? Who is the most senior person within that organization? Because you need to show them respect if they're in a really hierarchical culture. Okay. Think as well about whether or not you can talk to people higher or lower than you within that system. Okay. Will you need to ask permission? No. Quite often it can be important to remember that if you're going to speak to somebody at a different position, you might need to copy in their boss. So working out what's going to be happening within that culture can help you make sure that that relationship establishment works well and you're not making mistakes early on. Point 3, think about those first names, those surnames, and those titles. Okay. Point 4, take your time, don't jump the gun, particularly if you're thinking about those countries or those cultures which need further time, which work with the heart and not the head, that really need to get to know you. So build that time into the process that you're going to be making or establishing. And then, of course, prepare for those meetings accordingly. Really think about who you're talking to and what you might want to be saying to them. Okay, so those are those 3 areas that I've mentioned for preparation. Like I said at the beginning, there's loads of different other things that we might need to think about. And if you download that checklist, there's a few things on there as well that will help you. But I think these first 3 are really quite key. So knowing how much time it's going to take to build that relationship, knowing who you can talk to and what you might need to call them, what names or titles you're going to use. That's the build-up process. Now we've got this process where we're kind of starting to manage this relationship that we're building with our prospects or our leads. So while we're managing this relationship, of course, lots of other factors are going to come into play. Again, I've just selected that are going to be really important. Okay, guys, I'm getting a quick message on the screen that the internet is unstable. So if it pops off, somebody shout at me, let me know. Okay, so these 3 areas that we're going to be thinking about for managing our clients. What I've selected here is this idea of detail. So how much detail are we going to need? Deadlines and scheduling, which we're going to look at first, and then contact. How much contact do you need with these leads and these prospects to keep building up that relationship and really start to engage with them well? So thinking about deadlines and scheduling. This can be quite important early on when you're starting to work with international prospects, because you'll need to understand how people react to times, to meetings, to punctuality, etc., etc. So we know within the UK, for example, if we have a meeting at 10 o'clock, we're pretty much there at 10 o'clock. And nowadays, with it being Zoom, even more so. I had a meeting the other day and somebody hadn't arrived at 10:03 and I was starting to get really worried. Now, we have, again, a spectrum across which we can put all of these different cultures or countries around the world, thinking about how people will react to time. Now, I've put this for you just into 3 groups here so we can get a bit of an idea about where people might fall. So you can see at the top, that top group there, we've got Germany, Japan, and Sweden as examples of cultures or countries which are really quite strict with scheduling and deadlines. Then we've got in that second group, the UK, Poland, France. There's a little bit of flexibility. And that final group, Brazil, China, India. China is, of course, a country that is quite strict with times, but they're extremely flexible. So put in that bottom group because there's a lot of flexibility in there. Now, this is really important for a couple of different reasons. One, of course, if you're scheduling a meeting, knowing whether people are likely to be extremely punctual or not, but also 2, to think a little bit about how long that meeting is going to last. If time is more flexible, people are likely to spend more time talking to you, sharing ideas. They're not in such a rush. So cultures that are in that third group at the bottom, Brazil, China, India, more time might be needed to really talk to them and share ideas. So that can be really helpful. Whereas if you're talking to somebody, Germany or Sweden, the meeting might be shorter. There's other factors that play into this, which I'll mention in the next slide, but just to get a bit of an idea to organize yourselves around. Of course, as well, when we're talking about setting deadlines for different things, if we have different projects and we start working on with them, if you tell them you're going to send them information about the products that you're trying to sell, for example, as well, working out how important it is to stick to those deadlines. This can really help us having this information there as well. Okay. Now, I'm just going to mention one last thing on here, actually. Now, something that can help us, as I mentioned earlier on, when we're trying to think of which group those organizations might fall into, when we talk about them being egalitarian or hierarchical, here we can think a little bit as well about if we're trying to kind of guess which area our organization, our target organization might fall into. Countries in the developing world, so the BRIC countries, for example, generally tend to be a lot more flexible because in these countries, relationships are more important. People are more important. No? Organizations that will be based in what we'd call the more developed world, countries like the USA, the UK, time is money. And people are a lot stricter with their time and things are more strictly scheduled. And again, that can just give you a little bit of an idea of where people might fall into this scale. Now, linking in with that, so thinking a little bit more now, we know which deadlines we've got, thinking about how much detail people might need when we are talking to them. There's a bit of a crossover, which I'll mention in a minute, but this information as well can be really, really helpful for us when we're preparing to deal with people internationally. Now, some people like to know how we're doing things, tell me the practical steps, give me case studies, tell me exactly how this works. And other people want to know the theory. They want to know the concepts behind what we're talking about. They want to know where it fits into a bigger framework. And again, this can really help us when we're trying to tap into those international organizations, because if we know what they want to know and how much detail they need, we can prepare for that. So again, I put a few examples of different countries on the screen for you. You can see over on the left-hand side of those smaller bars, USA, Canada, UK, generally they prefer to know, these organizations within these areas will prefer to know how you're doing things. They want to know the implementation. And it goes back to that time is money. Tell me what I need to do, when, how, why, end of. They don't need more time explaining different things necessarily. So if you're preparing to talk to organizations within those areas, you want to know practical steps. Have case studies prepared. Okay, what is it that it does? How does it work? Tell me, practical things. Then on that right-hand side, you've got, for example, Mexico, Germany, and France. And these countries will want to know a lot more why. Tell me why this works. Tell me the theory behind this. Tell me how you've reached this conclusion. So you need to be prepared to have more detail at hand. You need to be prepared to spend longer talking to people, explaining things, and to be prepared for lots of questions. Okay, so again, that can factor into the time that you're going to spend talking to people, and it can also factor into what information you give people first. Okay. If we're talking about China, for example, they'll need to know a more holistic approach. So they'll want to understand things within the context and the whole framework. So this is the project, this is where this falls within that project, and then start to give them the why and the how. Okay. So it's really, really thinking about, if you're going to try and tap into how people understand things, which information to present to them first and how much detail to give them. And I hope that that little overview there helps you do that. Now, last point on this kind of management section really is how much contact to keep with these leads or these prospects as you're building up that relationship. Now, of course, there's a few different factors that will play into this really, but it's just remembering them all and not forgetting things. So of course, the complexity of what it is that you're trying to sell them, or the complexity of the product or the service that you're trying to engage with, but also how long it's going to take them to build a relationship, because the longer the relationship lead time, the more contact you're going to need to have, and also how much detail they're going to need. So all of those factors are going to play into how much contact you'll need to have with the client, and how many, well, the prospective client, the lead, and how many times you're going to need to talk, how many meetings you might need to schedule in, and how much time it's going to take you to really, really build that relationship with them. Okay, right. Third section. Now, okay, we've rushed through, of course, thinking about that preparation, so things that you might need to know when you're trying to engage with people. We've looked at a couple of things in terms of managing those relationships as we're starting to develop them. And now we're looking at, I've called it adaptation, but it's really more things just to be aware of. Areas that we need to be really careful with when we're communicating with these people internationally. Now, I've just put 2 points in here, but they're kind of quite fairly big points, really. Language and also cultural references. Now, when we're talking about starting to really engage with people, we need to think very carefully about the type of language that we use, particularly because a lot of these people that we might be talking to don't necessarily have English as a first language. So we've got to be aware of that and conscious of that. But also those cultural references, we need to be careful about what types of things we're including that people might not understand, or things that we're talking about that might have different references within different countries that might be offensive, and we need to be careful with as well. So we're going to look first of all at a couple of points relating to the cultural references that I think are really, really good examples of why we need to be careful with this and things that we need to think about. When we're looking at marketing content, so if we're trying to kind of get people to see us, to be aware of our brand, to start engaging with us so that we can follow up on those leads or those prospects, there's different factors that will play into that type of marketing content, or any content really that we're producing for them. Part of that's the text, then we've got imagery and colors and numbers. Okay. And this is often where people start to make mistakes because they're things that get forgotten about. Imagine you sell yoga products or things relating to the yoga industry. Now, you've got a couple of different images that you might be able to use on your content or putting at the bottom of your email to make it look fancier on your website. A couple of different images to choose from. On the front of it, they're both beautiful images. I love the kind of colors and the intertwined legs on the picture on the left. I think the picture on the right is really lovely and clean. But which one do you go for? You've got to be really careful because things, again, that often get forgotten are things that might be offensive. The picture on the left is showing the soles of the feet. Now, if you're dealing with anybody in the Middle East, India, China, you've got to be very careful with this because showing the soles of the feet is dirty and you're going to be giving them a bad image and it's rude. So you couldn't be using that image in your content. So that's one of the first things that we need to be really, really careful with. The image itself is beautiful, but just showing the soles of the feet might cause issues. So that one's ruled out, okay? So things like that, thinking about them. Next thing we've got here. So the background of this, the color of this is pink. Now, if you're working with Thailand, for example, I mean, a very specific example, but if you're working with Thailand, the days of the week have colors, that are associated with them. And every day of the week has a lucky color and an unlucky color. Now, pink, believe it or not, some people might know this. I wish I could see the chat box and talk to you, but okay, some people might know that pink is Tuesday in Thailand. So while pink is a lucky color in Thailand on Tuesday, it's actually an unlucky color on Wednesday. So if you're sending a message to a contact, or if you're giving them some products, or you're trying to launch a new product, or you're producing marketing content, or whatever is happening, if that's going to happen on a Tuesday, you might want to include the color pink because it's lucky and they'll recognize that. If that's going to go out on a Wednesday, you don't want to be using that because it's unlucky. And starting to understand these small factors can have a really, really big impact on how successful or not you are in building that relationship with your prospect. So taking these things into consideration can be really careful. That can be really, really effective because it can have a big impact on it. I've written this down because I never forget the days. So Tuesday, pink is lucky, but on Tuesday, yellow and white are unlucky. We mentioned that pink is unlucky on Wednesday and the lucky color for Wednesday, green, for example. So knowing these things, finding that information, writing them down and having them to hand can really, really be important. Okay, imagine you've got a more beautifully designed than this because, my skills are definitely not in design and art and everything else. Imagine that you are producing an advert for a new event that you're running and you said, win 4 free tickets, click here, follow this link, join the competition, blah, 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 blah. Now, the number 4 is very unlucky in China. So if you've got a potential Chinese lead or prospect seeing this and they see the number 4, they're going to be put off. So you've got to be careful again with numbers. 4 is unlucky in China, but the number 8 is really very lucky. Okay. Again, other things that get forgotten. So in the UK, we have, for example, of course, Friday the 13th, we know is an unlucky day. If you're dealing with Spain, that's Tuesday the 13th would be their equivalent. So when we think about translating things or creating text, we say, oh, we'll just put it in the language. But it's not only that. It's not only thinking about maybe translating the words. It's thinking about those cultural references. You might have something that falls on Tuesday 13th. We would think nothing of it. But if you try to connect or launch something on that day in Spain, it might not go as well as you think it's going to go. Okay. So again, colors, numbers, images, think about them. Okay, they get forgotten, but they really, really shouldn't. It can have a big impact on how much people are likely to connect with you. Okay, moving on to language a little bit. Now, when we are thinking about the type of language that we're using, we also need to be a bit careful with how we're phrasing things. So I've got for you 2 examples on the screen. And again, I really wish I could see all of you and actually interact with you now, but never mind. We've got these 2 phrases on the screen. No, so first one, the winners will be announced on Friday. Imagine this is kind of the follow-up from your competition with your 4 tickets. The winners will be announced on Friday. We could also say, we will announce, or we'll announce the winners on Friday. Which of those 2 is better? Which of those structures should be using in the language that you have? Know the language that you use. Imagine you're trying to connect with your prospect. You're trying to share information with them. You're trying to talk to them. How do you structure the ideas you're saying? Well, what we've got here are 2 different structures that are completely different. The first structure, the winners will be announced on Friday, is something we quite like. It's impersonal and it feels a little bit more formal in some contexts as well. But we've got a longer verb. You can see here this underlined section has got 3 parts. And we also don't say who is announcing this. So if you can rephrase your ideas, put at the beginning who is doing the action. So we the company, then what you're doing, we will announce. Start your sentences like that. Who is doing the action and what is the action? We will announce, and then your information, the winners on Friday. No, I will call you, not you will receive a call, but I will call you. Put at the beginning of what it is that you're saying the person who's doing the action. Okay, if you're dealing with people internationally, you're trying to connect with people internationally who don't have English as a first language, this format really makes things a lot clearer. Okay. Now, just a second example of this. The design was created by the best in the business. Now, imagine again, you're trying to give them this information about this product or this service that you want to sell them. No. You've got your 2 options. The design was created by the best in the business, or the best in the business created the design. Now, you might want to fluff this up, make it a little bit nicer, a bit more beautiful, change the words, but it's that order that I want you to be thinking about now. Okay. So again, you've got in that first one was created, so that action's got 2 parts. If you put at the beginning of your sentence, the best in the business, so the person who does this action, the person who created it, put them at the beginning, then your action, then your verb, created. Okay. So when you're trying to create or you are creating any content, you're talking to people on the phone, you're sending them emails and you're connecting with them, use this structure or this format. Put right at the beginning of the sentence, the person and then the action, and keep that sentence structure simple. Okay. It can go a long way to making things or making your content, making your ideas a lot more accessible for people who have English as a second language. Right, another one, get. Now, get as a verb causes lots of issues. Let's just put it that way. It causes lots and lots of issues. And we use it all the time. I'll get you a cup of tea. I'll get there at 10 o'clock. I don't know, I might get an A+ in my exam. The verb has so many different uses and we use it all the time. And this can cause a lot of problems if you're trying to engage with people and get them to really, again, and get them and make them understand you. So what I want you to do is try as much as possible to remove this from your vocabulary. If you're trying to link in with international prospects or leads and you want to make yourself understood, remove get. Okay. What I've done is I've just put a few examples here of different uses for it. Now, the verb itself has got about 11 or 12, depending on how you count it, different uses as a single verb, but then it has multiple combinations and it becomes really, really, really complicated. So if you can remove this, that's going to go a long way to helping build that relationship because it will make what you're saying more accessible. No? So what did you get for your birthday? Point number 1. What did you receive? You'll get all the latest features. Number 2, you'll have. get me some bread, bring me, or buy me. 4, did you get that? Did you understand that? 5, did you get there on time? Did you arrive? 6, he's getting £2,000 a month. Well, he's receiving, he's earning. 7, the wine gets better, it becomes better. And just with those few examples there, you can start to see how complex this verb can become. So I really would recommend, when you're trying to connect with international leads or prospects, removing this as much as possible from your vocabulary. Okay, it can really, really help. Anything that we can do to make what we're saying more accessible is going to help build that relationship. Okay, and then actually last couple of points now. I'm just checking time. Yeah, we'll have some time for questions as well, which is great. Okay, so last couple of things. You might be, while you're starting to engage with these potential clients or organizations, thinking about information that you can give them, marketing information, things that we have on the website, things that we might send out, things that we might put on our social media, helping people understand what your product is, trying to get them to engage with your product, showing them what other clients think of your product. And this is fantastic. And it goes a long way in any culture, in any area of the globe. But while we're doing that, as good as it is to use real quotes or real information, we just need to be a little bit careful with, again, how those quotes express those ideas. Okay, so you've got a couple of things here on the left. Hannah said, the interface is gorgeous and so intuitive, it takes next to no time to onboard new members. Okay, have a quick think about what might be the issue in that one. The second one from Jack, if you've not made your mind up yet, I'd recommend looking at the reviews on FIFO first. No, so quite short, looks like the vocabulary is quite simple as well, but there are phrases in there that can cause problems. So I've just highlighted them here for you so we can see that. The first one, it takes next to no time. Again, next to no time, what we're using here are idiomatic phrases or idiomatic expressions that are going to make it more difficult for an international prospect to understand what you're saying if they have English as a second language. No? It takes a short time. Okay, adapt what you're saying. If you can, adapt those quotations or ask people who are giving you these referrals or these testimonials just to edit them. Okay, the second one, if you've not made your mind up, make up your mind is a more complex verb structure, which is quite particular in English. And again, it causes problems. So if you can be aware of these things and adapt them, again, it's really going to help build up that relationship with your international sales prospects, because they're going to be able to understand what it is you're giving them, what you're showing them, you know, what you're trying to offer them to make them engage with or believe in your product or service. Okay, so quick recap. We've looked at those 3 different sections. Now we've looked at prepping, where we mentioned that idea of hierarchy. So are you thinking about dealing with an international prospect who comes from an organization that works in a very egalitarian way or very hierarchical way? And what will the implications of that be? Who can you talk to within that company structure? Do you need to find your peer, or can you address anybody? The names and greetings. So who is it that you're talking to, and what are you going to need to call them? Now think about those titles, think where they fall in that structure, and think how important it is to use the correct title within that country. And of course, relationship building. How long is it going to take you? Do you need to build in a lot more time in your sales process to build that relationship with those potential clients so that it works for you? Okay. Managing those international clients. No. So what are we thinking about for deadlines, scheduling? Are people likely to be flexible? Are people going to be very strict with their time? And do we need to build in some flexibility as well? Do we need to understand that those meetings might be longer or shorter? Do we need to understand that they're going to need to spend more time getting to know us before we have business type meeting where we talk about prices and different things? How much detail are they going to want when we are talking to them, when we're sharing this information with them? Do we need to think about giving them case studies, or do we need to think about giving them the theory and explaining how we've got to that point? And how much contact we're going to need, how frequently, and how much detail. So all of that will play into that together. And then, of course, that last part we just had a quick look at as well. So thinking there about those cultural references, the numbers, the colors, etc., and the language that you're using. Okay. So a very kind of whirlwind tour of things that we really need to be considering and thinking about to build into that sales process when we are starting to deal with international clients or international leads, prospects, whoever it might be. And I hope that that's given you a bit of food for thought and also helped you think about where you can start planning these points into your own sales. Like I mentioned, there's that checklist that's free that you can download, that's got loads of different things in there that you can think about. So I'll make sure I get that sent to you. There's also a follow-up event that I'm doing separately if you want to come along, that will talk about some of these points actually in more detail as well. So again, it might just be useful if you are dealing with these different types of organizations to get some more information about that. And that's on March 9th. And I'll send that out again in the information. Okay. Right, I've rushed through that, hoping that we've got some time now in case there's kind of questions or things that people want to ask specifically about potential clients that they have or things that I've mentioned. So I will leave it to Heather. I can't see anything.
Hello. So Angela has said, I find it so helpful. Thank you so much, which is a really lovely bit of feedback. Thank you, Angela. And that was brilliant, Kelly. Thank you so much. We do have a little bit of time for questions, guys, so please do feel free to pop anything that you are wondering in the chat box while you're thinking of them. My question, Kel, is what is like the most common mistake that you see customers making and you're just like, oh my god, this happens all the time? Are there any of those?
I mean, the biggest mistake I see kind of across the board with lots of people is assuming that everybody is going to understand what you say in English, or assuming that if you put things into shorter sentences, it's going to be understood. And that's just not the case. I mean, when you're working internationally, yes, like I mentioned, there's all these different things that we need to take into consideration, and understanding them and implementing things correctly can go a really long way to building a really strong connection with those people. But of course, if what you're saying doesn't make any sense, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you put your foot in it, because they're not going to understand you anyway. And I think people really need to step back and just think about how we can adapt what we say to make it more accessible, because that's the first stage. And very often people just say, oh yeah, but everyone speaks English, or I email them in English anyway and it's fine. And that's not what we should be doing. We need to make sure that if we are not speaking in their language, we're at least making our own language as accessible as it possibly can be. And there's loads of really easy changes that we can make. And it's just something that gets forgotten all the time. It's just an assumption. They say, oh, but we speak English. Well, no. I think that's the biggest one. And it's so easy to fix. No, it's so easy to fix.
Oh, perfect. No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And I think the other one that I had was, I mean, probably the most jarring side of it is when I've received it from the other end is on LinkedIn with the direct messages. And it's almost the flip reverse of what you were saying right at the start of the session, in terms of hi Mrs. Gray or hi Ms. Gray for me, and obviously we tend to use hi Heather, so it does feel quite jarring. Are there any kind of practical tips for that reach out on LinkedIn via direct message? Does that go down well across the board internationally? Should we just completely avoid it in certain countries?
In terms of what of the names that we might use?
Yeah, but also in terms of that very direct connection, it's so easy now to find a CEO on LinkedIn of a prospect company that you'd love to talk to. Is it a case where you should just weigh in and go right for them?
I would definitely not recommend going right for them in any case, and that goes for wherever that country will fall on that spectrum of being hierarchical or not, or working, what I mentioned before, the head or the heart. You've got to take a little bit of time to get to know somebody so that they're going to listen to you. And there's a lot to be said for taking your time to look into, right, who is the CEO, what type of organization is he working in, and how long should I really be nurturing that relationship before I jump in with whatever it is I'm going to say. In terms of how you might approach them and what names you might use as well, I think while you're starting to have that kind of conversation or that connection with them, there's always a point where you can say, please call me Heather rather than Miss Gray. Anybody who has kind of basic knowledge of maybe French or Spanish, for example, in English, we use you for everything. So it's lovely to meet you, whether or not we're in a formal context or an informal context. But a lot of languages, a lot of cultures have a formal version of these things. So if you do any French or Spanish at school, you know that you have to learn the formal version, which for us the only kind of equivalent we've got is if we maybe thinking of the Queen. So how is one today rather than how are you? And thinking about that as well. can play into knowing whether or not you need to call somebody by their first name or their surname, because is it going to be that formal or informal relationship? And at what point you can then say, please, let's call each other by our first names. You know, what would be in French or Spanish, for example, let's use the informal version. And there's a moment where you can say to people, I feel like we know each other now, I'm comfortable with using my first name. And it's perfectly common in a lot of languages and a lot of cultures to have that as part of the process where you're getting to know somebody. It's just that it's not so common in English. So I feel like I've kind of rambled a little bit. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fantastic and really interesting as well, just to kind of think how in the English language, how that's adapted in terms of social practice.
So it's acceptable to say, you know, don't worry at any point saying, oh no, please call me Heather, because it's part of the process in lots of cultures and languages. So.
Fantastic. And I guess a final question as well. We've also actually just had some really lovely feedback from Angela, who was very kind about you before as well, but has also mentioned that that this has been really useful for interaction with colleagues as well as prospects and as well as potential customers. So I think especially when you're managing teams internationally or working with teams internationally, you know, all of these will massively come into force.
Yeah, there is actually, Heather, just if anybody is working with multicultural, multilingual teams, there's quite a lot of work I've done in the past with international organizations at looking at how to manage teams who are multicultural, multilingual. If anybody has any questions, just send me a quick email, because there's loads of little bits of things that you can start to do that are really helpful. And I've probably got some slides or information I can share with anyone if they have questions or they're working in those environments as well. So do just ask.
Fantastic. Well, I will certainly send over in the follow-up email the full links to find more information, links to contact you, whether that's on social media or whether that's through email. I know you're super receptive either way to people's questions. And Chantal has just mentioned she's had to head to work, had a great time and learnt a lot. So thank you so much, Chantal. Thank you for everyone else who's joined us. And I think this is a really lovely time to wrap up. So just before I let you go, I had mentioned a little earlier, don't forget to check out bruntwood.co.uk/spark for our calendar of events. If you've enjoyed what we've got today, what we've run today with Kelly, hopefully you'll find some of the other content useful as well. We're working with a range of experts covering all sorts of topics. They're virtual for now, but for those of you who are based over in the UK and in the North, I can't wait until we're able to do this in person again soon. And I teased a little earlier as well about a really exciting project as part of the programme, which I honestly can't wait. We've been working so hard on it, but pleased to announce we have opened ticket registrations for our first ever annual conference, which is called the Spark Summit. It's free for a ticket, it's free to register, and we're bringing together some of the most inspiring customers that we're lucky enough to work with. Customers like AO, Jaguar Land Rover, Brewdog, people who have been doing some really incredible, inspiring things, as well as some really forward-thinking businesses like Love Raw and PKI, who you might not have heard of, but you will soon because they're absolute ones to watch. Now, make sure you have a look, make sure you sign up, because we've really tried to make sure that people are sharing their personal stories and not just the kind of the usual PR headline pieces. It'll be really cool, really inspiring, and I can't wait for you to join us. So thank you so much to Kelly. Thank you to all of you for watching, and I hope you found it really useful, and I hope the rest of your week finishes as strongly as it started today. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Cal. Bye.
Bye.